We just need a pause. Hello, and welcome to the PriceWriters podcast with Jeremy Keating and me, Katrin Townsend. Join us as we explore and discuss the world of insurance-related books, sharing our insights and recommendations. Today, we're talking about a book that is a classic in the business genre. It's called SuperCommunicators by Charles Duhigg. Jeremy, tell me all about this.
So there are some people who are exceptionally good at communicating, hence the name super communicators. Some people just are really, really good at bringing people into their world, the way that they think. And often they're extremely good at influencing, particularly the views of groups. And actually, one of the things that's very interesting about this group is that often they actually don't know that they're really good at it. And they're not the people we think that they might be. They're almost certainly not people who are very pushy with their opinions and views. But the book is all about these types of people. It's not really a how-to guide to be that sort of person. You certainly can come away with it with an idea of things that you could do to make yourself better at this. But it's very much a book that is about this type of person.
Okay, so how can we identify these kind of super communicators?
The overall experiment that begins the book and is the basis for it is where they were analyzing different types of communication and how people work together in groups. And they actually did brainwave studies. So they got people together. They'd all do things like they would watch different snippets of films, either without the sound or in a foreign language. So they couldn't really tell what was going on. And then the group would have discussions and they would talk about what they thought was happening in the films. So most groups, quite diverse people, would end up largely without a consensus among them about what happened, but they'd have a nice discussion and their brain waves would be kind of all over the place and everything, like people are when they do group work. And there was a number of groups that for some reason, the brain waves in the groups tended to synchronize and they would come away generally all agreeing with what the snippet from the film was about. So they started to analyze those particular groups until they found the particular individuals in those groups who were the particular unique thing about those groups. And then they started forming groups just with those people or with a couple of those people in, or they began to talk to them, record them. And they found this fairly small number of people who were just incredibly good at getting groups to think like them and come away with the same opinions as them. Yeah, really interesting, isn't it?
I watched the Simpsons movie in Russian the very first time that I saw it. And
Okay.
I will admit to not having any idea what was going on because, firstly, the pig on the ceiling, the spider pig, I was like, what? What is this? But secondly, also, you can't like do any lip reading or anything because they're all animated. So
Yeah.
that was a kind of a slightly bizarre experience. I wish someone could have told me what was going on then, but there you go. Dough is still dough. But anyway, so that's super cool. So they found some people who kind of have this superpower of communicating. What do they all have in common?
They tend to ask 10 to 20 times more questions than other people do. So that's an interesting one straight away. They're not telling you their opinion. So that's quite surprising, isn't it? So you're not coming away persuaded by what they say. They ask you more questions than people normally do. They tend to be very good at mimicking and talking in the style, the tone, and the mood of other people. But they often do not realize they do this, and they tend not to realize other people don't do it. They tend to match how other people talk. They're usually very comfortable continuing conversations when there's an awkward pause or a silence, but they tend not to do it in a forced or off-putting kind of way. So they might just continue. So the conversation lulls, they pick it back up where it left off, or they're straight in there with a new joke. They're comfortable talking about another topic. It's really interesting, but it doesn't feel forced. And they're generally not dominant speakers. And they might typically have roles that involve using these skills, as you would expect, but they're not necessarily leaders either. and they are often unaware of their powers. So they started to think about what these people do and what is special about them and how they tend to work. What the researchers found is that there's actually three types of conversation, and most of these super communicators know this to be the case. Most of the rest of us have no idea, but most of them know it to be the case. And these three types are that people either want to have a conversation that involves coming to a decision, they want to have a conversation that is about their identity, or it's about emotion. Okay, so another way of putting it is decision, emotion, or social. Now, the particular one to focus on there actually is the social conversation. So about 70% of conversation that we have is actually social. We're not particularly communicating how we feel about anything. We're not particularly communicating that we need to make a decision together about anything. We're just talking. If I'm telling you about a book that I read, that is social conversation, but it also links very heavily into my identity as a person. What these communicators tend to do in that situation is ask me questions about the thing I'm talking about, but they're not surface level questions. They tend to ask about feelings. If you're telling me about a book, as an analytical person, I might ask you when you read it, what it's about, factual things.
All
A
the things we
super,
talk about on this podcast.
yeah, exactly. A super communicator will tend to ask you things like, how did you feel about it? What did you change in your life because of the book? Actions did you take because of it? And it tends to be questions that are not surface level. It tends to be that they will ask you things that make you talk more, but you talk more deeply about yourself. And let's be honest here, most people are not very good at opening other people up about how they feel and think and being interested in what other people say. So it's quite interesting in that way because we all hear the phrase, oh, you're a really good listener. But actually, it's not just listening, it's getting people to talk about how they feel about things. So, as an example, and they use this one, say you're talking to your partner and you've got a problem at work. Okay. Now, we have all done this. We try and solve that problem for them, don't we? And we're like, oh, what you should do. And then the conversation goes badly. And you're just like, why did the conversation go badly? Yeah, really strange. So the problem is that they didn't want a decision conversation there. So they didn't need you to help them decide on how they deal with this problem. Most likely, they just wanted to give you their emotions. So we can call this offloading sometimes, and sometimes it does go that far, but often people want to share their emotions. How are they feeling about this? And they want to be asked questions. They don't realize they want to be asked questions about it, but they want to be asked questions about how they feel, how they are, or they just want to talk. They're just being social. They just want to tell you about their day. And we're there hearing, oh, you've got a problem. I want to solve it for you. And it's not a decision conversation. So it goes badly. So they found these three types of conversation type. And they found that super communicators are exceedingly good at following along with the right conversation type instinctively and bringing people to the point where they're willing to talk a lot more about themselves, about their feelings, about stuff that's really below the surface of what goes on in their mind.
Okay, so I see how this works on a personal level when some people just want to have social conversations or just want to vent and talk about emotions. But at work, surely most of our conversations are not necessarily just about making a decision, but could be a discussion to canvas different opinions. We're not talking about different deployment testing approaches because that's our preferred topic. We're doing it because, that's something that needs to get done. So, how does this map to our work environment? And I guess what does super communication look like in our pricing teams on a good day?
You're absolutely right. We think to ourselves, a lot of the conversations we actually have at work are what we call decision conversations. So I'm giving you a task. We're deciding that you are going to go and do this thing. Or you've come to me having done some work and we're deciding if I'm happy with it. Yeah. But this is the point. Most conversations are not that, actually. That might be a small snippet of the conversation we actually have. The conversation probably begins with, hello, how are you? What did you do at the weekend? So actually, the super communicator has already opened up a conversation and tuned themselves emotionally with you before we go into doing the decision conversation. And that just goes a lot better because you're already in tune with each other. So you might think of someone you just instinctively like at work. They may not actually be easy to work with. They may not always agree with you, but strangely, you just think of them as someone that's really nice to work with, someone you get on with and you get work done with, and so on. Someone you just want to talk to. And often that's these super communicators that they don't have to agree with you all the time. So at work, firstly, taking the time, understanding how someone is feeling when they come and have that conversation, because all of us are feeling different ways at all the times that we come and talk. Yeah. So just instinctively matching how people are being emotionally when they come and talk to you can be quite effective, making that conversation go well. So that's just one example of how you can be at work. So the conversation is probably going to eventually lead to a decision point at work. Probably. That's, if you come to someone's desk and they work for you, that's probably where we're going with it. But that is not the majority of the conversation. And that part will go much better if we're good at the 70% of it. It's probably social.
Pricing teams aren't very extroverted most of the time. We talked about this in the past. Most of the time, it's a team full of introverts or heavy majority introverts. We're also a team that is often pretty ambitious and competitive. We want to get stuff done. And we're very analytical people. We're not always necessarily in touch with that emotional or identity kind of touchy-feely, fluffy side of who we are and what we do, particularly not when we're at work. But it strikes me that identity actually plays a big part in our lives at work. Whether it's, "Oh, I'm the expert in this thing," and people put a lot of store in being seen as the expert in a certain software or a certain process. You even see this at manager or director level where people feel they can't ask questions or learn a new coding language or whatever because they wanna continue to be the expert where they are. But also people who feel like they should be the decision maker for whatever topic. How can we use identity and talk about identity at work in a more open and honest way?
So I think interestingly, identity, as I said, the sort of 70% of conversation that's about identity, that's about social areas. The thing you can really do if you want to be considered a super communicator is the asking lots of questions, but not making them surface level, not just very blue minded analytical questions. And you can do this with work quite easily, actually. If someone's showing you their work, you can ask questions like, how did you calculate that? Or you can ask questions like, what was your method for calculating that? The point is to get a bit more deeper into people's thoughts and open them up to talking more about it. So if you ask someone simply, how did you calculate that? The answer is just very, I took this cell and that cell, and I did this and I did that. It's very factual. They're not sharing with you anything about who they are as a person in that answer. If you ask them, what made you calculate it in that way?
I feel if someone said to me, "What were you thinking when you calculated
Yeah,
it?"
yeah,
I
yeah.
would be like,
Yeah.
"Oh my goodness, that sounds like there's something majorly wrong." It's just so interesting though, because there's technically nothing wrong with that. As a question, it could be totally neutral, but I think it does speak to our educational backgrounds that we are trained to think that there should be a right way to calculate anything that we come up against, even things that are brand new situations or ad hoc analysis. And so we're expecting that there would be a right answer and that any questioning of what was your thought process around it or even it was any tentative step towards those emotional conversations makes us feel supremely uncomfortable and slightly defensive, I think. Even when you ask me that, and like this is hypothetical work, right? But like I'm thinking there's nothing wrong with it. I'm thinking that that's the right way to do it. Like so isn't that just a really interesting, I guess cultural thing? I can easily imagine that a team of very analytical pricing professionals would all have a similar reaction to that. It would be a really interesting experiment, though, just to try for a week or two to see what reactions you get and to understand the difference in both documentation, but also creative thinking. If we moved from asking people, how did you calculate it? Write down the formula effectively to what was the thought process behind it, or even talk me through how we got there.
Those are much better ways of asking that question. But the
That'd be a
point
cool.
is that that opens someone else up to talk to you about it. They're not just going to point at sales and tell you how they multiplied it together. They're going to give you some of their thought process about how they did it, and more of themselves, more about their identity. You nearly led to the main problem with this book there, actually, which is that it's very interesting that these people exist, but I think it really lacks a framework to tell you how to do this. It's just, it's 5% of the material is how to actually do it.
But I do wonder though, we hear a lot from pricing teams who say they are absolutely swamped with work. They're in the middle of big projects with just so much to do all of the time. Would we want to spend more of our work day talking to each other, our colleagues, about our feelings and identity and things? Because I hear it, in fact, the opposite from most teams, that they actually want to make their meetings more efficient and more streamlined, get to that decision conversation more quickly. How could we redesign whatever meetings that we have on a regular basis to incorporate these ideas, but in a way that doesn't add lots of extra meeting time to our day?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily about adding lots more meeting time. I think it's about being better with the conversations that you have. One of the things that super communicators do through all of these questions is that they work out what people want, what they want from the conversation, what they want as people. Sometimes that people want to be helped, hugged, or heard. So that's a different way of talking about this whole decision, emotion, social thing. Now, as a manager, most of us have dealt with someone coming to us who is upset about something. And we might well go into decision mode very quickly. Oh, you've got a problem. What would you want me to do about it? That person's not been heard, have they? They've made, it uses the phrase hug, but it doesn't mean literally hugging people. Sometimes people want to be listened to. Sometimes they want a bit of placating, a bit of hand holding. And sometimes they actually want your help. So in many ways, this is more efficient because you can end the conversation quite quickly, but you can tend to have everyone feeling unhappy about how it went. Imagine a situation where somebody who works for someone else comes to you as a manager and tells you about an issue they've got with that manager. So that can be a bit of an awkward position to be in. And you're like, well, I don't really have any power to sort out any issues here. But actually, that person might just want to be listened to, and their own manager is not very good at that. So the very fact that you actually take a bit of time to do that, which to be honest, you would have had that conversation anyway. So it's whether that conversation goes well or whether it goes badly is in your domain. And it's just like that with so many other things. You're going to have a lot of these conversations. You're going to have these meetings. How do you want them to go? Do you want them to be effective? These super communicators, they get together with a group of people they do not know. They just all watched a film together where they didn't understand a word of what was going on in it. They have a discussion and people go away being like, oh yeah, that's what it was about. They went away thinking that that person's opinion is the correct one and it's theirs. Now that is a superpower, isn't it? Imagine that. If you went into meetings, 20 people in a pricing committee in front of you, they went away agreeing with what you wanted them to think at the end of that meeting. Wow. Isn't that powerful? And it's just a matter of asking questions of people, understanding what they want from the conversation. This is the tips. This is the big thing that super communicators do. So they ask a lot of questions until they understand what people want. They tend to go into those three categories. And then they look to answer what you're looking for as the second part. And then you tend to go away agreeing with them. And it's as easy as that. Now, the problem for me with the book is that there isn't a decent framework for how do I apply this. But that is quite a powerful thing, isn't it?
Okay, so would you recommend this book? Because it kind of feels like the point of the book is that it's flagged that these people exist and told you you may or may not be one, but probably not, right? Given the odds. And it doesn't actually tell you how you can be better at this particularly. So I guess I'm struggling to think, what is that real application here? And given the particularly analytical people we have in our pricing teams, is it likely that we work with or for a super communicator?
I can think of a couple of people who are quite senior, who are very level headed, very calm. Generally, everyone in the team likes them. They're very good at getting work done and very well respected. And I think they probably are super communicators, but there's a very small number of them in pricing that I do think they get promoted quite highly, actually. Imagine you just instinctively are very good at getting the pricing committee to agree to your proposals. And a lot of them don't even realize they've got this power, right? People leave meetings with literally their brainwaves synchronized to that person. Think about people that are senior who leave you feeling very calm after you talk to them. Yeah, it's really interesting. I would recommend this book, actually. I was like, actually, this is full of really useful information. And I have been applying a lot of the things that come up in this book. So that's quite interesting in itself. Yeah,
So how are you applying this book in your real life?
I had for quite a long time got much better at asking people who I've just met questions like, do you like where you live? What made you move there? So you meet someone, shake hands, hello, where do you live? You know, that's really common, isn't it? Are you from Stroud? You know, that's a nice question to ask, isn't it? Doesn't tell you anything about the person. They're like, yes or no, I'm not from Stroud. Nice factual answer there. What do you like about Stroud? Certainly more interesting to answer, isn't it?
I feel like given our audience, most people are like, well, statistically, they're unlikely to be from Stroud on. But like maybe thinking London might have been slightly more like,
The authors analysed hours and hours of interviews that were done with astronauts, oddly enough. So during astronaut selection, they obviously go through a lot of conversations and interviews to find out as much as possible about them. Now, there's two particular examples that they use, but the astronauts were in a particular selection process. They were all asked quite similar questions. And the interviewer was wearing a really loud, garish tie that intentionally clashed with their jacket. And they dropped all of their papers on the way into the interview, right? And the conversation went, oh, I'm really sorry that I'm wearing this tie because obviously it doesn't match my suit. But my child really wanted me to wear this particular one today. I hope you don't mind. Right. And some people were very empathetic and asked questions about the child and why they wanted that and so on. And other people were just like, no, oh, okay, no, yeah. But oddly enough, people that got up and helped them collect their papers together. Right? Some people got up and helped them collect their papers together. Some people didn't. And they were asked some really quite deep questions about themselves, like, what's the most difficult thing you've been through recently? And then having answered that, the interviewer would pretend to get visibly upset and talk about a recent bereavement. And some people would ask them questions about it, but careful questions like, how are you feeling? How close were you to that person? Did you? And so on. Other people would be like, oh, I'm really sorry. That must be very difficult for you. Now, here's the thing, right? The best astronauts were the ones that did things like asked about the child who'd chosen the tie, that got up and picked the papers up. that ask deep questions about the bereavement. There's a particular example. There's three astronauts on, I think it's Apollo 7, who ended up very angrily disagreeing with each other whilst they were on their return flight, arguing with mission control and refusing to do the mission properly. And oddly enough, they linked this back to all three of them showed bad communication skills in those initial interview meetings. And they just, the three of them happened to be put together and then really friction. It's incredibly telling, isn't it, when you put it like that, just how these skills then show up in how well people do it work. So yeah, I would recommend this book. Maybe you won't come away from it with loads of things that you can apply. Maybe you need to read it a few times to understand it. But maybe recognizing in other people have got these skills. If you're choosing a team and you spot someone that's got these fantastic communication skills that can literally leave a room with matching their brainwaves, well, you should get that person on your team. So yes, I do recommend reading it.
All right, wonderful. Well, strong recommendation from Jeremy there. And I know that I'm going to go away from this trying to notice more moments when people are asking lots of questions. Try it with me. I'd love to hear how you found this. And if you try that experiment by asking people in your team how they're feeling, do let me know how it goes. I'd be fascinated to hear how you go. Join us next time, and we'll be looking at a book that has a pretty punchy title. It's called Bullshit Jobs. You won't want to miss this one. PriceWriters transforms pricing professionals into the most respected leaders in insurance. Find out more about our engaging training, graduate schemes, and our capability audits by visiting PriceWriters.com.